If you like Star Trek and Star Wars and you like ship battles, you'll like this channel. And if you like what you see, please subscribe and make a comment. It helps. It really does. And with that being said, let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about the Cardassian Neterok cruiser. This is one of the first battle cruisers implemented by the Cardassian Union. It was used in many wars with minor races. It's no longer seen in any of the future episodes of Star Trek. So by the time TNG or Deep Space Nine came around, this ship was completely and utterly removed from the Cardassian Union's forces, and we have never seen it again. And the only information we have about it comes from Birth of the Federation. Okay, so we have some comparative analysis data that we can look at. So we know the Neterok class cruiser was for attack, defense, and escort duty. We know it had an industry build cost of 2,990. Its hit points are 270. Its shields were 310. Had 8 phaser emitters at 29% damage each, 5 photon torpedoes at 44 each, galaxy range medium, speed 1, and maintenance cost 91. So what does all that mean? So let's take a look at the description the Cardassians have about this ship. So Neterok class cruiser is a true warship designed especially to engage and destroy enemy vessels and installations. It carries a large complement of offensive weaponry and its reinforced hull can withstand sustained enemy fire even after its shields fail. So there's some information we're receiving from the Cardassian description. The Cardassians view this ship as an actual warship. They feel that it's loaded with a lot of weapons, and they believe it's capable of attacking enemy structures. So we know the idea of this vessel is to be a front-end attack ship for the Cardassian Union, and they believe it's strong enough that it can take on enemy defenses to push the front line. So this ship would have been around the same time period as Captain Kirk and Spock. So that would be the era that we're going to see this. So the Constitution Rift, the beginnings of the Excelsior Federation, those kind of ships are what we're seeing here. Klingon Birds of Prey, Klingon D7s, Katangas. Those are the things that this ship is seeing. So when we're going to do a comparative analysis, we need to remember that we're not comparing this to futuristic ships. We're going to compare this ship to what was around during the same time period. So most of you guys are familiar with Constitution-class starships. And, you know, when you take a look at a Constitution-class starship and you compare it to this type of ship or a Miranda, those are the most relevant ships that would be a good comparable analysis, in my opinion. So of the two, I'm going to go for the Miranda because we know that the Constitution was the main Federation starship for a time period, but it was replaced by the Excelsior. And then the Miranda seemed to be the more constant ship of all these ships. And so I think it would be more likely this ship would run into a Miranda if it was in a combat situation during that time period. So we're going to use those stats and we're going to do a comparable analysis. Okay, so remember, as we're looking at this analysis, we have our own actual tables from the movies and things, and these are based off the game, and they're not going to be correct, but we're going to get some data from it and then kind of learn some things. So from the perspective of these two ships, we can see that as far as the industry build time, you could build a Miranda slightly faster than you could this Neterok class cruiser. But one thing you really do notice is the Neterok class cruiser is a lot. Like, it's very expensive. It's got a high cost maintenance value. So that's telling us that that ship is expensive. So it takes longer to build and it takes a lot of maintenance. So it's probably a pretty large ship and it probably takes a lot of crew. Now, the other thing is it's galactic speed, so it's going to have about the same distance as a Miranda, but you can see its galactic speed is 1 versus 2. So we know that this ship is slow. So it's got a medium range, but it's slow. So that's some things we learned about it. And then we know that Miranda's torpedo tube unit that you see on top of it, or the module, depending on how you want to look at it, that module has 2 forward-facing torpedoes and then has 2 rear-facing. So the torpedoes can shoot front and back, but in reality, there are actually 4 torpedo units within the ship because there's 2 in the front, 2 in the back of the module. But in a fighting situation, it's forward-facing. It's really going to have only 2 torpedoes to use against its target. On the other hand, the Neterok class cruiser has got a whopping 5 photon torpedoes. And those torpedoes are located in the front. And for those of you who are not familiar with ship maintenance and ship data points, this is a lot of firepower for a ship of this time period. To give you an idea, when it comes to its torpedo volley, which is strange for a Cardassian ship, it's even greater than that of an Excelsior variant of this time period. So Excelsiors can have up to 4 torpedo tube units located on the ship. This has got more than an Excelsior. So this is a very heavy hitting starship for its time period. Now it's got 8 phaser emitters, right? So 8 phaser emitters is very standard. You know, you see the same on a Galore. So it's got 360-degree firepower, but this ship is not relying on that as its main weapon. It's obviously a torpedo frigate of some variant, and that's what its main weapon is. So now let's talk about that. So this ship is equipped with a lot of torpedoes. And so they're going to be single shots because Cardassians are really never seen using anything. And single shot torpedoes are pretty much the standard of most races during this time period. The only exception is the Klingon Katanga, which has an advanced torpedo module. Right off the top of my head, I don't know what the exact make and model of it. I forgot what the unit is, but it's capable of launching 3. So this ship is definitely designed to take things out at long range. So in my mind, the reason for having torpedoes and having such a massive barrage of torpedoes would be for taking on structures. So the idea behind that is a ship that's designed with so many forward-facing torpedoes. I mean, it'd be really good for hitting installations or outposts from long range, damaging them, then getting up close, and then hitting them with your phasers as well as the torpedo volleys once they've, been able to reload them. So this ship is going to attack you definitely from a distance. And then it's going to close in, and it's going to try to wipe you out with those torpedoes, and then finish you off, obviously, with the phasers. So this thing is designed to take on outposts, and I think that that's kind of its primary role during that time period. Is it's a heavy hitting, long distance attack ship. So as you can see, obviously it can be used to fight off enemy craft, but in my opinion, that many torpedoes would definitely be designed to take on installations and like outposts and things of that nature. So as we take a look at the ship, there are some things that I really do notice about it. It's very boxy, very square shaped. There's not really a whole lot to it. And that makes a lot of sense because if you're designing a ship and its primary use is just to be combat and taking on enemy targets, and you don't have very good shield technology, what you're going to do is you're going to want to try to substitute that with hull strength. And the best way to do that is making a simple, compact, square hull. So there's some things that we do see. This is the front of the ship. You can see that the navigational deflector is not particularly that big on this ship, so that would go to show you that this ship probably doesn't have the greatest sensors. You can see that there are multiple photon torpedo tubes around this unit, so you can see where these little white dots are. Those are the torpedo launchers. There is obviously a 5th one, but I don't know where the 5th one is. I wasn't able to identify it. Another thing I want to point out about this ship is when you look underneath it, and we look at the engines, you can see that they have actually 3 pretty large engines on the ship. So what we're looking at right there are 3 impulse engines. So what does that tell us? Well, we saw that the ship is slow. So this ship is probably very heavy. It's very well armed. It's very slow. It's not maneuverable. It's got these large impulse engines, but yet it's still very slow. And that's probably something to do with, obviously, the Cardassians' technology. We know that it's not as advanced as the Federation or the Klingons, but during this time period, I really don't know what the difference between the technology gap is. I'm going to assume that they're probably pretty close. I mean, this ship, as far as its stats, are pretty, uh, you know, moderate for warship of its time period. So I do think that this ship is. We know it's slow, but it seems to be like a pretty decent ship for the time period that it was in my opinion, based on some of the data that we see here. So let's kind of look at this ship and let's compare it to, let's say, the ship that replaced it, the Galore. So if you go in the game and you take the stats and you remove the stats that it gives you in the game, and then you put the stats that we have from our data tables, and then you convert from what the game has to what we see our data tables, this is realistically what the ship would have been presenting. So its shields would have been 130,000. It would have had a really powerful hull of 617,500 with a total defense of 747,500. Now, the shields of the Galore in the future are around 260,000, and this is the variant 1. The hull is 1,235,000, and with a total defense of 1,495,000. So a Galore is definitely an improvement on the ship. Galores are not extremely fast. They're not extremely maneuverable, but they are much more maneuverable than this ship. So this ship is very boxy, it's very slow, but when it comes to actual torpedoes, Galores are going to be equipped with one torpedo launcher, if any. This is when they brought spiral wave disruptor technology in. The ship that we're seeing here does not have spiral wave disruptor technology. It's using whatever it is, using some kind of phaser emitter of some kind. We don't really know what it is, but it's probably, well, based on the data we see, it's equivalent to a Federation Type 6 phaser. So a Federation Type 6 phaser is around 2,800, and a standard spiral wave disruptor is 7,500, which is significantly better. Now, a spiral wave disruptor cannon is around 65,000. So we know that a Galore is definitely going to outgun this ship. But one of the things that I want to talk about is we're going to compare this to also the Miranda, and then kind of give you an idea of its actual strength value. So let's do a direct comparison to the Neterok and the Miranda. So when we do a direct comparison, we can definitely see that the shield value is significantly lower than that of the Federation Starship. We can see its hull value is significantly better, and you can see overall on the data table it says that this ship is actually stronger than the Miranda. And you might think that that would be the case, especially having 5 full-time torpedo tubes, but here's the problem. If this ship was to get 5 shots, and we just say that they got lucky and all 5 shots hit, you're looking at a damage potential of 325,000. So that means the Miranda can withstand a full barrage, and then that means that the Miranda would then be able to fire back. And once the Miranda fired its 2 full-time torpedo tubes, that would basically wipe out the shields, and then it's going to be a firefight. But the problem is there's still some shields on this ship once they get into range, and then that ship's going to be losing its torpedo tubes pretty quickly, because I'm guaranteed the Miranda's captain is going to focus on those torpedo tubes and taking them out. So then it's going to come down to, will this ship survive firefight back and forth? And it's kind of up in the air, because not only does the Miranda have Type 6 phasers, it also has those heavy mega phasers, and those things are delivering a lot of damage. So to be honest with you, some of the stats, you look at it, it's kind of deceptive. And I think that the Cardassian ship looks stronger than what it really is. This ship is very slow. It can be outmaneuvered. You get out of the front of the ship. Not to mention, it doesn't have a very good targeting system. We know that because navigational deflector is really small. And for a ship of that size, it's not maneuverable. It doesn't have very good sensors. You're not even going to guarantee it's going to get that hit. So when the ship is in a combat situation, you can't guarantee that all the torpedoes are going to hit the target. Most of them are probably going to miss. If you do get lucky and you can hit your target because it's a large target, then this ship's going to be pretty efficient. But anything that is like, smaller ships, this thing's going to really struggle against. Anything that's more maneuverable than it, it's also going to struggle against that. It really wants to fight things that are slow like itself. This ship would be really good for taking on installations. I think this ship is really good for planetary bombardment. This ship could carry a lot of troops. Now, as far as actual fighting, yeah, this ship is going to be something that's going to really make you think twice about entering Cardassian space, especially during the original Star Trek era. Having a ship that can blast you with 5 torpedoes is pretty scary. But on the other hand, what that means is this ship is going to be expensive. It's going to need a lot of crew, and you're not really getting that great of a warship, but you're paying a lot for that warship.
So we're just going to watch.
So overall, I think the ship is a pretty good representation of some of the defects and some of the positives about Cardassian technology. Yes, this ship is going to be really good about taking on stations. It can blast them from far range. But when it comes into an actual combat situation, you're going to see some of the limitations of the design pretty quickly, seeing as it needs to fight you from a distance. It doesn't really do very good at close combat. It really will start suffering at close combat. It needs to be used to taking on planetary surfaces. It's also going to be really good at taking on, obviously, space stations. So overall, I don't think that this design is really that bad, but you can definitely see that the Cardassians knew that there was a problem, and some of their newer designs tried to compensate for that. Overall, the ship has a lot of torpedoes, but it doesn't really have that many actually, offensive weapons. And if you get behind the ship or to the side of the ship, it's going to have a really hard time maneuvering to get to you because the ship is heavy. It's slow. But yes, if it can get you from range, then it's got a pretty good chance of doing some decent damage. I would honestly consider this. I mean, I know that it's stated it's a cruiser, but to me, I think of it more of an artillery ship. 5 torpedoes. I really think it should be behind the fleet. It should definitely not be operating by itself. If it's protected by, let's say, more maneuverable, lighter ships, I could see this being an effective ship in the Cardassian fleet. Definitely for its time period, but by the time the border wars took place, this ship was so old and obsolete. There's a reason why they got rid of it. It was just so expensive. I really think that because of the cost of the ship, moving towards spiral wave disruptor technology was the way to go, because you're getting more bang for your buck than you would have gotten out of this ship. So overall, the Neterok cruiser is a decent starship. I really wouldn't say it's bad. It's not great. I would say it's pretty medium. I would say it's a medium level starship overall. It's got its strengths, it's got its weaknesses, but that's my opinion about it. What do you guys think? Now, something to think about it before you make your comment is understand that the Neterok cruiser probably wasn't designed to take on the Federation, the Klingons, or the Romulans. This ship was designed to take on the ships and around their Cardassian system, which would have been minor race ships, which are significantly weaker than the great powers. And when you look at it with that perspective, I'm sure this ship would have been definitely better than anything the minor races are sending out there. So this ship would definitely be a pretty overwhelming opponent for any minor race. But I'm saying in the higher tier ships with the Federation, the Romulans, and the Klingons, their maneuverability, their firepower, their better shields, this ship doesn't hold its own against any of those ships, in my opinion. I think this ship liabilities really come into play because of its slow factor and heavy armor. Though that it was a necessity because of the lack of shielding or poor shielding, I can understand why they did it, but I think this ship design went out of favor quickly once they had conquered those minor races, and then they started interacting with, say, superior ships like the Federation Klingons and Romulans. They realized that this was not going to hold its own against those ships. It was expensive and something better needed. And then you started seeing some of the futuristic ships. Now, in the bottom right-hand corner, I believe this is a Resolute, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think that this ship design actually came from Venom Geek Media. I just want to point that out. I'm not 100% sure. As I was describing it, it looks familiar to me. I think I've seen this design. I don't know if he acquired it from someone or if it came out of a game. I honestly don't know. It's one of these ships that I thought was interesting. I want to show a comparative size analysis. The Galor is coming from a Star Trek game, as well as the image of the Resolute is coming from Birth of the Federation. But the Birth of the Federation Galor looks so terrible, I didn't want to use it, so I was just using a Galor from another game. I'm pretty sure the Galor in here might actually be from Armada, but I'm not 100% sure. So if any of you guys know where these images came from or you recognize them, please be kind enough to put a comment in there so people who want to check them out, the original artists can, even though I don't know who they are. Okay, now with that out of the way, let's talk about the lure of the ship and what I think of it. Honestly, I really, really like it. I think the lure really fits in with the Cardassian technology gap between them and the Federation. It really emphasized how they were using the best that they had, realized this isn't really going to work, and then they changed to the newer ships that we see in TNG and stuff. I like how Birth of the Federation depicted that. For those of you who never played the game, you can see a real emphasis with the Cardassians that their ships don't really have that great of shields. They have a lot of hull to try to compensate for that. Their ships are very slow compared to the other ships, so it shows you that there is a lack in warp technology or impulse technology. They're kind of like slow moving and tanky, and they do really good in groups together, which was another emphasis that we see in TNG and stuff like that, where they're fighting groups by themselves when a lot of their ships are out on their own. Cardassians are always fighting in groups because they're trying to compensate for their weaknesses. So from a lore perspective, I think the ship is fantastic. I really do. And as far as the design goes, I think it's cool that they're showing you that this is the pre-Cardassian standard design that we know, which is like the emblem. That this is what things that they were building before they had the technology to make their ships basically fancier looking. They're just form versus function. I really like that. I thought it was really cool. So, in my opinion, I'm going to give this ship a gold star for really good lore. Obviously, performance, well, not really, but that's all good. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I found it really interesting to learn about this ship. I've seen it in my Star Trek game. I think it's funny that we've never ever seen it in any other Star Trek game. But I mean, to be honest, it's a very simple kind of goofy design. But I like lore a lot, and so it follows the lore. So I'm giving it a gold star.